I only see,
Oh,
I don't really see anybody. I see you, honey.
Well, I see Michelle, Judy, Hani, and Ruchi, and myself.
Maybe it's because
That's
it's
Are we
right.
on.
expecting
Okay.
anybody else? Okay. So this is part 2 of Amos. We're actually entered chapter 2. So let me just we're here on the share screen for a second. Just to recount what has been happening until now, we have a prophet whose name is Amos. He is in the Treasar. Now, the Treasar, the last Nevi'im of the Treasar, by the way, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, live at the end of the Babylonian exile and enter into the Second Temple period. So they actually saw the building of the Second Temple. However, Amos, according to most of the Mefarshim, actually lives much earlier. He lives even before Yeshayahu. So he lives quite far away from the destruction of the first temple. So he's one of the earlier prophets of the Treasar, even though he's like number 2 or 3, like he's even before Hosea. And remember, Yeshayahu, at the end of Yirmiyahu sees the Chorban, Yeshayahu does not. Yeshayahu lives at the time of Chizkiah, which is the same time, basically, of the destruction of the northern tribes of Israel, around 722 years before the Common Era. And Amos is a little bit before that. Amos lives before the exile of the 10 tribes, but not a long time before. So he's predicting the exile of the 10 tribes. Okay, based on that, let's go back to his prophecy. The second question was, where does Amos actually live? It says that he originally was from Tekoa. If he's from Tekoa that we know today, that would put him in Binyamin, which would mean that he lived in the southern kingdom of Judea, because the split between the kingdoms already happened after the death of Solomon under his son Rechavam ben Shlomo. However, from what it says in Amos, it's not clear whether he's a prophet of Judah or the prophet of the northern kingdom. Later on, we'll see in his argument with Amatzia says to him, Brach lecha el Eretz Yehuda, you should go to Yehuda in the south. There they like Nevi'im like you, but we don't need people like you here. So from that, I always thought that it meant he was a Judean. However, it's not necessarily so. It could be that he is from the northern kingdom and he's from Tekoa, which was in the Galil. And they're just saying you shouldn't be with us because you're talking like a Judean, but not necessarily that he was from there. And from this Nevuah, which we're going to see today, it also doesn't look like he was a Judean, because not only does he talk about the sins of Judea in the north, while he's in the north, the sins of Israel, which he's going to talk about, he doesn't mention the cardinal sin of the 2 agalim, the 2 calves of gold, which were placed in Beit El and Dan, which was the new place of worship instead of Jerusalem when the northern kingdom was established. So because he sort of like overlooks this, it looks like he is from the northern kingdom, and he's just used to overlooking it because that's what everybody did who was a Navi Hashem in the northern kingdom, because that wasn't going to change. So let's just look over this again quickly from last time. I have about 7 different prophecies here from Amos. And also remember, he says, God, like a lion, is roaring from Jerusalem. So all northern prophets, just like Jonah, for them, Hashem manifests his Shekhinah in Yerushalayim. Doesn't matter northern kingdom or southern kingdom. According to the Talmud, Yonah, who was a prophet of the northern kingdom from Gata Chefer, he used to go 3 times a year to Beit HaMikdash and Shalosh Regalim. That's just the way it was for him. It didn't matter if he was from the northern kingdom or not. So it's very possible that Amos is the same. So as I said, it's still not 100%, but there are a lot of things that seem to point to the fact that Amos might be a prophet of the northern kingdom. So the first of his the 7 nations that he's talking about is Damascus, which of course would be Syria, which is called Aram. At that time, during the time of David HaMelech, it's called Aram Sova. By the way, I think I mentioned last time that the Aleppo Codex, which was the Sefer Torah, which was kept in Aleppo until 1948, until the Jewish community was burned down, basically the Beit Knesset, and the Jewish community was destroyed in Syria, in Aleppo. That Sefer Torah is known as Keter Aram Sova, the Aleppo Codex. Aram Sova is Syria. That's the way it's referred to, even to this day. Even after the Sefer Torah was burned, together with the community, in the 50s, they found pieces of the Sefer Torah from Arab merchants who were selling them. And eventually the state of Israel bought all the pieces it could and put it together. And that you have today in Heichal HaSefer, the Shrine of the Book, which is at the Israel Museum. There is 1/3 of the Aleppo Codex is still around. Why is the Aleppo Codex so important? It is the oldest manuscript we have of the 5 books of Moshe, the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, meaning in manuscript form. And according to Rambam, who is familiar with the Aleppo Codex, writing in the 12th century, he ascribes the Aleppo Codex to the Bnei Asher family, who lived in the Galil and were known for being experts in the Masoretic tradition of how to write the Chumash. So it was considered a very important codex. As I said, 1/3 of it still exists today. You can get a facsimile copy from it. They sell it maybe even at the Israel Museum. Even when you go to the museum and you see parts of it, it's facsimile. The real one is in some safe somewhere. The same thing, by the way, with the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I just want to point out the importance of the Aleppo Codex. It also has, by the way, nikudot. It has nikud, which most Sefer Torahs don't, which is very helpful. And one last thing about the Aleppo Codex, even though it's not directly connected to Amos, but since we're talking about Aram and Aram Sova, so the Aleppo Codex, the difference between an Ashkenazic Sefer Torah and a Sephardic Sefer Torah is 1 letter. In Devarim 23, it's how you write the word Pitzua Daka, which is a bodily issue, a problem. So the word Daka in Hebrew, the Ashkenazic Sefer Torahs, I write it Daled Kaf Aleph. It's easy to remember because Aleph like Ashkenazi. In the Sephardic Sefer Torahs, it's written Daled Kaf Hey. So this is the difference between a Sephardic Sefer Torah and an Ashkenazic Sefer Torah, which of course you would say is amazing. It's only 1 letter, right? For communities that lived apart 1,000 years. From a traditional point of view, obviously, it's complicated still because, the Torah is not supposed to even have 1 letter different, but that's what we have there. With the Yemenite Sefer Torah, there are 8 letters difference between the Yemenite Sefer Torahs and the Ashkenazi Sefer Torahs. Now, the interesting thing about the Aleppo Codex is some of the letters in the Aleppo Codex are similar to the Yemenite tradition, but we don't have the whole Aleppo Codex. But as I said, from what we have, some of them are similar to some of those 8 different letters different in the Yemenite tradition. Okay, I just wanted to mention that. So Amos is reproving in absentia Aram and telling them what's going to happen to them. This sort of formula that keeps coming back. I will forgive them for 3, but not for 4, which means they did too much. And when they destroyed all the areas of the Gilad, again, the Gilad was an area which belonged originally to the northern kingdom. It was east of the Jordan River. And this area was captured by Aram many times, and it was freed by Israel many times. One of the times were during the lifetime of Yonah, the Navi, who had a prophecy that the northern kingdom would be expanded, and it was when they captured the Gilad, and that he was the big hero. That's probably another reason why he wasn't so happy to go around and say, to them that Nineveh was going to be destroyed, and then Nineveh did tshuva because Nineveh was the arch enemy of the northern kingdom. Okay, and Hazael is the king of Aram, and Ben Hadad is the lineage, the families who ran the show in the kingdom of Aram. Then the second one was Asa. Asa, of course, the Plishtim. There are 5 cities of Asa. Even today, by the way, in the Gaza Strip, Asa is one of the largest cities. In that time, too, out of the 5 cities, this was the largest city. And so Amos is talking about the 3 iniquities, the 3 sins. Again, you have the 3 and then the 4. It's not something specific when the 3 and the 4. It becomes an idea, meaning it's one too many. That's what 3 and 4 is about. 4 means one too many. Al haglotam galut shlema lasgir le'adom. Here again, we have this idea, which comes up even later on, that there were people running away from the conquest of Edom, the Edomenians, and they were helped, meaning these people who ran away from Edom ran towards the Gazans, and they were sent back. Okay, in other words, you're not going to take refuge with us. You're going to go back to Edom and either fight them like a man or die. So, and that's basically, so that was the iniquity of the Pishay Asa. And then it says, Shilach the Eish b'chomat Asa, I shall send fire in the walls of Gaza. Yichrati Yoshev mi Ashdod, because Ashdod was one of the second of the 5 cities of the Plishtim. V'tomech shevet Ashkelon, those who hold the scepter. Ashkelon, the third one of the 5 cities. Veshivoti Yadi, and I shall smite with my hand Ekron, 4 out of the 5 cities. Vavdu Sherit Plishtim. So 4 out of the 5 cities are mentioned. There's one which is missing, and that is Kiryat Gat or Gat. Why? I don't know. If you want, I can look here to see what he says in this Perush. Why is the 5th one not mentioned here? One moment. I don't see anything here about that. But he mentions 4 out of the 5. Okay. So we had, so the first one which he's rebuking, as I said, was Damascus is part of Aram, is Syria. And then it's Asa in the southwest, which, by the way, is probably closer to the kingdom. Well, it's between the 2 kingdoms, you might say. It's still in the northern kingdom. And then we have Shlosha Pishay, and for the 3 sins of Tyre, Tzor. Now, today, Tzor is part of Lebanon, but it seems in those days, Tzor is Phoenicia. So, in other words, but they are close to those living in Sidon. Now here he says, Tzor krovali Eretz Yisrael yoter mitzidon. B'yameinu atzur b'dorom medinat Lebanon, ach b'torah inen nizkeret. So he actually mentions that today, Tzor, Tyre, or Atzur is actually in southern Lebanon, and it's actually closer to us than Sidon, than Sidon. But that time it's called Phoenicia. But it could be Phoenicia was southern Lebanon of those days, too. I can actually look that up, where Phoenicia was. Hold on. I had something else here, but I'll look it up right now. It's called Phoenicians. I was looking this up the other day, actually. Phoenicia. Here, Phoenicia, ancient Semitic maritime civilization. An ancient Semitic Thalassocratic civilization in the Levant. Extended here in their culture, stretching from Arwad in modern Syria to Mount Carmel in modern Israel, covering the entire coast of modern Lebanon. On their homeland, the Phoenicians extended through trade and colonization throughout the Mediterranean, from Cyprus to the Iberian Peninsula. So it was quite a large kingdom at the time. It included all of Lebanon, so it's basically right next to Aram. So Tzor of today, Tyre would also be part of Phoenicia, would be a Phoenician city of those days. So let me go back to this again. So again, for the 3 sins of Tyre, which is in southern Lebanon, for 4 I shall not, because they delivered captivity to Edom and did not remember the brotherly covenant. Again, when the Edominians, when the Edomites fought against Israel and against Syria, again, those who ran away, they sent them back. By the way, in the Torah, it says that if a slave runs away from their country and comes to you in Israel, it says you're not allowed to give them back. You have to keep them. Lo tasgir eved ladonav. Do not return a slave to its master when it ran away. Because the assumption, if it ran away, it must have been pretty bad.
Jewish, or it doesn't matter?
It's usually not Jewish. A slave running away from its master is usually not Jewish. With a Jewish slave, they have 6 years. But they'll still be a slave. You just don't give them back to their master if it was a non-Jewish slave.
You take them as a slave yourself?
You take them as slave yourself. Yeah. If that's what they want. If they don't want, then I guess you can just pass them on. But I would assume that they would prefer that to whoever master they had before. You know, it's very interesting when you think of the Parshat Mishpatim. We just came out of Egypt, and we had our, what I call the manifestos of, we have, well, there are a lot of things to say about Shemot in general, but you have Kriyat Yam Suf, then Matan Torah, the revelation which is the covenant with God. And then you have our constitution, which is Parshat Mishpatim, if you want to put it that way. It's sort of like a concentrate of what the Torah laws are going to be. How does Parshat Mishpatim start? It starts with slavery. Right? Ela Mishpatim asher tasim ki tikne eved ivri. If you buy a Jewish slave, it seems shocking. We just came out of 210 years of slavery in Egypt. And we're standing at Mount Sinai, and Moses now is telling us from the first laws how to treat slaves. Shouldn't it be not to have slaves? In my opinion, what's going on here is that in antiquity, everybody had slaves. There's certain things that if you push them to an extreme, they're not going to happen. So you start telling them, if you have a Jewish slave, it's maximum 6 years. If you mistreat them, they go b'shen v'ayin, they can leave, right? You hit them in the eye, you knock out a tooth. There's certain things you can't do. All of a sudden, all these limitations that they've never even heard of when it came to slavery, because they were slaves. They know all about being a slave. So there's these laws of slavery. They're given the laws. And in my opinion, the laws of slavery in the Torah are to teach you that this is not a good idea. It's to make it slavery not economically that feasible. And so on the one hand, it seems surprising that that's what Moshe should say in Parshat Mishpatim, the first, at least written law that we can see to them. I'm not talking about what Midrash says that they got Shabbat and Para and Dinim before that, but at least the first written law. It's obviously slavery exists. We're now going to limit it. And eventually the Jewish slaves do exist during the First Temple period. Yirmiyahu tells people that they have to let their slaves go because obviously there are people who did not do that. And eventually by the Second Temple, I don't even think we hear about slavery anymore. So slavery really stops in Jewish. There is a certain amount of slavery in still in Judea after the Second Temple period, which is interesting, but only among rich people, like Rabban Gamliel. The famous story, he had a non-Jewish, and that was a non-Jewish slave, by the way. Yirmiyahu was mostly fighting about the Jewish slaves. They didn't let free. But Tavi, he had a slave whose name was Tavi, and this Tavi was a Talmid Chacham. And Rabbi Gamliel would refer people to this Tavi guy who knew a lot of Torah that he could teach them. Remember, non-Jewish slaves go through a sort of conversion when they work for you. They are theoretically Jews. Why do I say theoretically? Meaning they are Jews that they have to keep all the mitzvot that a woman has to keep, and even less, because there are mitzvot that a woman keeps which are contingent on time, even though they're contingent on time. Like, for instance, all the mitzvot of Pesach, which are contingent on time, because they were also in the same geula. And there are other examples too. And that a slave does not. But if a slave goes free, then they become a Jew 100% automatically.
Rafi, I thought that Jewish slaves, were used only because they had to repay a debt. So that was the only way that
Yes, but
they.
I'm saying it like a lot of laws, it was abused during the time of Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu reproves the people for keeping their Jewish slaves, possibly keeping them more than 6 years, even against the slave's will. That there is such thing in the Torah that you can, you put a hole in your ear, and you v'avado le'olam, which means you can be enslaved until the Yovel, until the Jubilee. Le'olam means till the Jubilee. But I assume that there was people abused it and kept slaves after the 6th year, even if they didn't want it, even if the slave didn't want it. The Jewish slaves I'm talking about. But non-Jewish slavery disappears. As I said, after that period, we don't know of non-Jewish slaves. They seem to exist among the wealthy in the 1st and 2nd century. But again, they were treated well. And did it exist in other places in our history? I don't know. It was definitely not obvious. So this Edom is mentioned a few times. So Tzor also got together and delivered captivity to Edom and did not remember their brethren. But Shilach the Eish b'chomatzor, the walls of Tyre will be burnt down, and also her palaces. And then we have the third one, Edom itself, one who fought against us. Also, again, for sin I shall not return. I shall not. Okay. For pursuing their brother with a sword. Who's their brother? Yes. Remember, Edom are all descendants of Esav, and Esav is Yaakov's brother, and Yaakov is Israel. So the Edomites are our brethren. They pursued us with swords. They destroyed their mercy. Well, Shichet Rachamav means they had no mercy. They grasped forever their anger and kept their fury. So because what Edom did to Israel and to Judah. Now here, I'll just read a little bit what he says here about Edom. Yeah. Now here it doesn't say what it was. He says, the brother, of course, is Israel. That we already said, because they are Shichet Rachamav. He should have had compassion. Yeah, he actually says it's not clear exactly what happened, which fight it was. But then it continues. V'shilachti eish b'Teiman. I shall send a fire into Teiman. If you remember, Teiman was one of the children of Eliphaz of Esav. It was a grandson of Esav. His name was Teiman. So this was a city in Edom. Right? A son of Eliphaz, son of Esav, Teiman, and therefore Teiman is sometimes one of the names of Edom, and there's possibly, it's either a name for Edom, just like Israel is called Ephraim sometimes, and it could also be an area in Edom. Botzra, which is mentioned also, was a city in Edom, and it was one of those fortified cities of the Alufim. Today, Teiman, of course, is south of Saudi Arabia. Of course, Edom is not so far. Edom is it's west of the Jordan River and the south of Ammon and Moab. So it's actually on the way, if you want to put it that way. It's on the way to Saudi Arabia. Botzra is here, Botzra of Edom. There's also a Basra, of course, in Iraq. So I will send fire into Teiman, and it will consume its palaces. Then Thus says the Lord, for the 3 transgressions of the children of Ammon. Again, Ammon and Moab, which are to the right of our border, just above Edom. But 4 I will not return thee, because they ripped up pregnant women of Gilead in order to enlarge their border. This is also something, unfortunately, our enemies in Gaza seem to have the same idea. In antiquity, they would rip out children from pregnant women as an act of brutality. And the Arabs seem to have inherited this idea in order to enlarge their border, which means they did this in the middle of a war. And when do they do this? Again, it's that same Gilad. Aram fought Gilad from the north, and Ammon fought Gilad from the south. Everybody wanted that piece of land called the Gilad, the Ramot Gilad, which belonged to Israel, but Israel was on the western side of the border, and this was on the eastern side of Jordan, right? Israel's on the west side of Jordan, and the Gilad is on the east side of the Jordan. As you know, the West Bank is the East Bank. The West, right? Well, yeah, it's the east side of Israel before you come to the Jordan River, but it's the West Bank of the Jordan River. Okay, let's continue. Now this is also, and I will kindle a fire in the walls of Rabbah. Rabbah here is a city in Ammon. But as you know, Rabbah is also a city in Morocco. You have cities that are, and it shall consume its palaces. The shout, the day of battle. Truah, it's not, Truah, of course, is the blast of the shofar. Biyom milchama, because the shofar is blown when there is a war. That's why in chapter 3, Amos will say, Hayitaka shofar ba'ir, ba'am lo yecharadu. When people hear the shofar blast, you think they don't get nervous because they know a war is coming. If today we have sirens, they had the blast of the shofar, was the signal for war. Besar b'yom sufa, on the day of battle and the tempest of the day of the whirlwind. In other words, because Ammon fought against the Gilad, and he also blames Aram for fighting against the Gilad for no reason, just because they were greedy and they wanted more land. So I will send fire in the walls of Rabbah, which was the largest city at that time of Ammon, and it'll be a day of blowing the shofar, a day of battle, and a day of a tempest and a whirlwind. V'halach malkam bagola, and their king shall go into exile. And the princes together, the ministers of their kingdom of Ammon, will go with him. Okay, well, that's the end of chapter 1. So how many nations do we have here? We have Aram, and we have Gaza, Ishtim, and we have Sor, Phoenicia, that's 3. And we have Edom, that's 4. And we have Ammon, that's 5. Okay, let's go to chapter 2. So far we have 5. I think we're going to have 7. Ko Amar Hashem. This is what God says. For the 3 transgressions of Moab, meaning I could theoretically bear it, but for the 4th, no. Because they burnt the bones of the king of Edom to lime. Now, this also seems to be something which happened during that war with Edom. What was this thing about king? Now, it looks like king burning the bones of king of Edom is a disgrace to the body, but is that a reason? It seems like a bit of a lame reason. The question exactly what happened here. Some people say that they burnt the bones and used it in building a building. One of the Mefarshim say that, or that they used it actually for making building blocks. Some of them, of course, say that they burnt him alive, which was an act of cruelty. Some even think that this is the story which is brought in Melachim Beit, chapter 3, verses 26 to 27, where there's a story of the king of Moab, who in order to save himself, sacrificed his son as an offering to the gods in order to win the war against Edom. The only problem there is that we're talking about Moab. And there it says that Moab actually sacrificed his own son and not the son of Edom, unless it's a metaphor. And it was his son, but they call it as if he killed Edom through sacrificing his son. It's not clear 100%. As I said, one of the possibilities is it's that story in Malachim Beit, which is a strange story. It's Edom fights against Moab. Moab starts losing. The king of Moab sacrifices his son as an offering to the gods in order to win the war, and God gets angry against Israel that they allowed that to happen, because I think Israel and Moab were fighting Edom together, and because of that, the war was lost. But this one, another possibility is that, again, Amos doesn't tell us all these things. Other possibility is that they actually burnt him alive. So because of the achzariut, the cruelty. So I will send fire into Moab. It shall consume the palaces of the Krayot of Moab. And Moab shall die amidst the tumult. B'sha'on. Sha'on means like actually desertion. And with the sound of a shofar. You had a sound of the shofar with Ammon, and you have the sound of the shofar with Moab, who are brother nations. Bichrati shofet bikarba, will cut off judges from within it. B'chol sarea erogimo, and I will slay all its princes together, just like was said about Ammon. Okay, we just finished 6 nations. Now come the 2 surprising ones. Until now,
There's no Amalek?
Amalek doesn't theoretically exist by this point.
Well, okay.
Yeah. So, yeah,
I have a
during
question.
David's time, they said Amalek. I'm not sure they had Amalek by this point. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, I have a question about the shofar. So you had said before they blow the shofar to announce war, but there are other things that they. What were the other things that they blew the shofar for?
Well, we're talking about non-Jewish nations. So when it was one of the
the
ways,
non-Jewish nation.
yeah.
Okay.
Actually, in our tradition, we blow the chatzotzot sometimes. Sometimes it's bugles and sometimes it's a shofar.
You mean for war or for other
even
purposes?
for war, yeah.
Okay.
Utkatem b'chatzotzot, I think it says.
Right, Rafi, I have a question also. So what do you think? I mean, what is it about the 3 times Hashem lets it go, and then the 4th time? What is it about the 4th time that Hashem won't forgive them?
Well, first of all, you can see it seems to be a formula, just like in the Aseret HaDibrot. Al shilishim v'ribeim. God is willing to forgive up to the 3rd and 4th generation, but no more. So here you have a concept, the 3rd, but not the 4th. So there seems to be some idea about this 3rd and the 4th, that the 4th is too much. So it's, as I said, it seems to be a concept.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Why so tolerant?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It should be after once, you know.
We make the same mistake today, by the way. Yeah.
That we're too tolerant. Well, when Hashem becomes tolerant, I assume he knows what to be tolerant about. So human beings, you have to be more careful. You have to be tolerant on your own people, less tolerant with your enemy. And sometimes we do the exact opposite. That's the problem. That's why we get into a pickle. So now the next one, until now, you can imagine Amos standing in the town square, maybe in the Shomron, which was the capital city, and people are gathering around because they knew who this guy was. He gets up, he prophesizes every now and then, and they start listening, and it sounds like hot news off the press. Okay, God is going to destroy Aram. God is going to destroy the Gazans, the Philistines. God is going to destroy the Phoenicians. Okay, God is going to destroy the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites. Whoa, we're doing well. Right? All the enemies of Israel. So people are like, hey, maybe we should drink the l'chaim now, or should we wait for him to finish? And then all of a sudden comes the card that they didn't expect. 2 cards that they didn't expect. This one, the first one, by the way, they probably didn't have that much of a problem with, unfortunately. And it goes like this. Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Yehuda, yea, for 4 I shall not return. Now, this is very interesting because we're talking about a prophet who's standing in the Shomron in northern Israel talking about the sins of Yehuda. You could say, wait a sec, there are no sins to Israel. But as far as the northern kingdom is considered, yeah, these guys, they're as if brothers, but they just pretend to be righteous. They're not really. And what are they? Al ma'asam Torah Hashem. They rejected the law, Hashem's laws. V'chukav lo shamaru, they're not keeping his statutes. Veitum kozvehem, their lies mislead them. By the way, kizvehem usually means idols, which their forefathers followed. So, what is going on here? This one I found, I think, the most mysterious. I'll tell you what I think it means in a moment, but this is very mysterious. For one thing, though, it could be all the things that he is blaming Judah, the northern kingdom of Israel also does. So they're probably like wondering, why is he telling this to us? We're not exactly, it's like walking over to a secular Jew who eats treif and saying, those Jews over there, they should be punished because they eat treif. He's thinking, but I also eat treif. So, well, maybe he means you too. But that's really what's happening. He's talking about, in Yehuda, in the southern kingdom, they were more frum than the northern kingdom. And all the things here seem to be about frumkai, right? Mm-hmm. It's the Torah Hashem, chukav lo shamaro. And they're probably thinking, wow, if he's blaming Yehuda for this, what about us? We've got this Egel in Dan. We've got another Egel in Beit El, So I'm just saying that I would call this an indirect rebuking of the northern kingdom when they're hearing from Amos what he has to say about Yehuda. They're still listening because it's not about them. But I'm sure they're a little bit mixed up here. So it's like, that would have been something they should have said to us, but they didn't. Thank goodness. But what exactly is going on? Before I want to continue, by the way, okay, I'm going to read to the end, then I'm going to give you my hypothesis, what this might mean. Hypothesis number 1, though, I think is he's indirectly actually talking to Israel, to the northern kingdom. But he's rebuking Yehuda so that they should realize it's about them too. But I'll get back to this. Then number 5. It's first, V'shilachti eish b'Yehuda, I will set fires in Yehuda, v'achla armonot Yerushalayim, which of course happens many years later with the destruction of the first temple, maybe 200 years later, from the time of Amos. Amos is, hard to know exactly, but very possibly Amos is like about 800 years, maybe 780 years before the Common Era. So yeah, it's a good 200 years before the destruction of the temple. Maybe a little bit less. Okay, Ko Amar Hashem, Al Shlosha Pishei Yisrael. All of a sudden he gets to the northern kingdom. Al Arba'a Lo Shivenu, but the 4th is too much. What do they do? Al Michram Bechesef Tzadik Evyon Avur Na'alayim. For selling an innocent man for money, a poor man in order to lock the fields. Because here it says Bavur Na'alayim. Bavur Na'alayim, I don't know why he translates it locks the fields. It means like for nothing, just for a pair of shoes. But let me read to you what he says here. Bavur Na'alayim. Yeah, he says it's a small amount. That's the way he explains it. And some people say it's a larger amount because some people couldn't afford shoes. Other people say it's talking about, oh, now I understand why he's saying to lock the fields. Because remember, in Kohen Sefer Root, when you did a kinyan, when you acquired something, you would take off your shoe and give it over. So some people say for a shoe means for the for the transaction, the business transaction went along with taking off your shoe, like in Ruth. But what's going on here, first of all? He's blaming them for ethical things, not religious things. In other words, I know you guys are religiously challenged. I got it. I grew up here, okay? But how come you're also ethically challenged? Why are you selling people for money? And he goes on. Ashorfim alafar eretz, who aspire on the dust of the earth, serving the head of the poor. Derech anavim yatu, and they pervert the way of the humble. A man and his father go to the maid in order to profane the holy name, which sounds like prostitution. Let's keep going. And they recline on pledged garments. If you remember what that, it says that if somebody pledges a garment, it says in Devarim, if somebody has just one garment, meaning they're that poor and they need a loan, so you give them a loan, and the only collateral they can give you is their one garment. It says give it back to them at night so they can sleep in it. Don't keep it during the day, right? So, and they say they recline on the pledged garment, which means they keep it at home anyhow. They don't give it back to them at night. But the Torah says that if you take that one beged of collateral, you got to bring it back to them at night so they can sleep. Let's say they have one blanket. They recline on these pledged garments against the Torah, which said you have to give it back to them if it's a pledge, if it's collateral. And they do this next to the altar, meaning they pretend they're so important. They can come to Beis Hamikdash and they even walk with that garment. In other words, they don't even understand the hypocrisy. The yain anushim, and the wine of the fine ones they drink in the house of their gods. Yain anushim, which is also an unusual, because it's from the word onesh. The way he explains it, Chavalim, of course, is a mashkon that I explained. Eitzukom Mizbeach, that they would make a sudat mitzvah in the Beit HaMikdash, and they would bring this collateral mashkon with them as if it didn't mean anything. It's sort of mitzvah haba ba'avera. You're doing a mitzvah with an article that you did a transgression. Yain anushim is wine which was bought from money that they took from transgressors as a knas, or that they took the wine as a sort of like penalty from somebody.
So you were saying that nothing changed over thousands of years.
Yeah.
But my point is that Amos,
Bingo.
well, unfortunately, human nature has
That's
not
it.
changed over 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Yisrael, like disguise yourself, go to shul and do your stuff.
I remember when I was at Hebrew University, I was working at the synagogue there, the Hech synagogue, for 3 years. And there was one guy there who was in charge of the dormitories. He was sort of like a Masorti guy. He's trying to say to me why he doesn't go to shul. He says, look, I know all my father's friends would buy the seat for Rosh Hashanah in the front row, which costs more money. And I would say, what's this front row? Can God hear you better in the front row than if you're sitting in the back row? Of course, we all know what the answer is. The answer is the people see you sitting in the front row and they know you're important. That's the real answer. It's not about God looking at you in the front row or in the back row. But yeah, that's what happens.
Or the people that sit in the back talk about the people in the front because you can see them. So.
Yeah, and in my father's shul, there was this gentleman, I won't mention names because probably Michelle remembers him, who used to talk all the time during davening. So somebody comes over to him. They had ushers at that time in the shul. Somebody comes over and says, "Excuse me, Mr. So-and-so, did you come to the synagogue to talk?" He says, "Of course I came to the synagogue to talk. If I want to daven, I can do that at home."
That's right.
I mean,
It's true. You got to
honest, right?
socialize.
Yeah, you get be honest. Okay, my point is when he is talking about Yehuda, who is the frum part of Am Yisrael, he's talking about all these avirot ben adam lamakom, right, between man and God, which they're a little surprised to hear. But in my opinion, it's also a way of rebuking them in indirectly, because they know that the southern kingdom is the more frum one. But secondly, when he rebukes them, it's all things ben adam lachavero. In other words, what's your excuse about that part? The fact that you have this ego in Beit El and Dan, that means that you have to be evil people too? Is that what it's all about? In my opinion, it is partially about that, because in the end of the day, what is idol worship? It says in the Torah that God created man in God's image. What is an idol? A human being creates God in his image. That's an idol. Why would we want to create God in our image? In order to be the bosses. It means we control, not God. So we create a God in our image. The exact opposite. So basically, idol worship is really about human arrogance, having an anthropocentric world. Now, Yahadut believes in an anthropocentric world, but you also have to believe in God, because you're the shaliach of Hashem. But in the end, in this world, Hashem's not going to do the tikkun olam. You got to do it. He just waits, and every now and then it helps before we mess it up too much. So, okay, now I just want to continue with this a little bit. Anochi shmadeti et ha'emori, destroyed the Amorites before them, coming out of Egypt. Shekagova razim govho, or high like the cedar trees. If you remember the story about the Anakim, when the Meraglim came and they saw these giants. The chasonu kalonim, and they're strong as oaks, and I destroyed their fruit from above, their roots from below, which means they were totally uprooted from the land, the Amorites. The Amorites, by the way, were very often, they are a nickname for all the 7 nations because they were like the largest of the 7. So sometimes they talk about the Amori. Yaakov talks about the Amori. Asher lakachti biyad ha'Amori b'charbi v'kashti. Yaakov, he tells as if all the Canaanites are the Amorites. And again, now he continues, and he's talking to the northern kingdom. I took you out of Egypt. I led you in the desert for 40 years to inherit the lands, again, of the Amori, which is a nickname for all the 7 nations. And I raised up your sons as prophets, and your young men as Nazirim. Ha'afin zot, is this not so, children of Israel? I want to mention, by the way, both here and in Yirmiyahu, a prophet is a title of somebody who, of course, after a lot of pursuit, they receive revelation from Hashem. And the Talmud in Megillah says that there were many, many prophets in Am Yisrael during the time of prophecy. Kiflaim ki yotzei Mitzrayim, double the amount of the Jews who came out of Egypt. Now, even according to the most minimalistic counting of the people who came out of Egypt, which is the men from the ages of 20 to 60, that's 600,000. Double that would be 1.2 million. If you throw into that women, because there were women prophets, the prophets mentioned in the Bible are 48. You have 48 men and 7 women. But actual prophets, you have Kiflaim Kyotzei Mitzrayim, which is at least 1,200,000, maybe even 2 million, throwing in women and children. So the Talmud actually says, so why do we only have 48 men and 7 women mentioned in the Tanakh? Because only prophecy which was needed for later generations was written down. If it was not needed for later generations, it wasn't written down. Most prophets, their prophecy was for themselves. I always say to my students here in Bar Ilan, I say, if God appeared to you once in your life and said, ask for me one request, what would it be? Yeah? I don't hear you.
It's
You're-
peace.
Yeah. I'm sorry?
Do this.
Peace.
Yeah.
We're peace.
Peace
Well-
and a nice apartment for all of us.
That's right. Well, let me put it, because we're in the middle of war, I would probably agree with you, but if we were not in the middle of war, I wouldn't agree with you, because most people, what they really want to know in the end of the day is something about themselves, like why we're here.
Well, they're selfish, not like me.
Well, I don't know if that's selfish. I think that's a totally legitimate question. You know, once you're having a meeting with the manufacturer, why not find out why I'm here in this plan in the first place? So I think it's a totally legitimate question.
We're here.
And
We're here to suffer. We're Jews.
Okay, maybe you're from Polish backgrounds.
Yeah,
Yes.
Polish. Polish. Yay. Three of us here. Yeah.
Yeah, this Polish woman who was actually born in Poland, she told me that a local Polish joke of two Polish women are talking on the phone. So the first one says, I can't even remember the names of it says, Basha, how you doing? Says, oh, I'm doing fine, thank you. Thanks for calling. Oh, I said, excuse me, I didn't know you have guests. I'll call another time.
She was faking it. She would have been complaining.
That's right. Okay.
Right.
So I'm going to continue with this. You get
I have
okay.
a-
Oh, wait. I forgot what I wanted to
Okay.
say. Remember your question. You have Nevi'im and you have Nazirim.
Mhm.
Nazirim were also a position in society, it seems, in the First Temple period. Of course, a Nazir we know is somebody who doesn't drink wine, doesn't cut their hair, etc. But it seems there were people who took Nazirut Shimshon, meaning they're Nazirim their whole lives. And these were considered very righteous people who were also a bit ascetic. And it became a status in society. Yirmiyahu also says, "Vatashket Nazirim yain." You didn't believe the prophets. You tried to force the Nazirim to drink wine. In other words, you didn't want these people who were setting a good example for you. Yes, please. What was the question?
Oh, I was just gonna say that, like, maybe because I'm using modern sensibility, but like, if he was gonna stand there and for each one of those nations, and then Judah, and then the Northern Kingdom, it all said 3 I'm okay with, but 4, I mean, it's like, huff and puff and blow the house down. I mean, like, it's very unsophisticated, is what I'm saying. Like, it sounds fake. Sounds fake. How could each
Well, let
one
me
be
put it
the
this.
same punishment for the same number
Yeah,
of?
it's almost like it's more like a poem or a story
Yeah.
that he's telling.
I told you
But
it's
it can't be true that that's for three
it's a
for each one of
formula.
them, 3 and then the
3
fourth
and
one,
not 4 means they all did too much. They all overdid it. That's all it means.
So it's not literal.
It's not literal.
It means they overdid it.
Okay.
It is the straw that broke the back of the camel. That's what it
Okay.
means. They all overdid it.
Mhm.
That I can
So
I
like
can
now,
deal with
for
3. I
instance,
can.
in Asa, they overdid it.
And well, he's listing things that they did, which is not something which is tolerable,
An
which
error
are
as she
crimes
means.
against humanity.
Right.
You want to
An
call it
error
that
as
way. Yeah. But my point is that all these 6 nations mentioned before, even including Judah, was to lead up to the last one. But if he would have come into the market square and said, okay, Israelites, let me tell you your problem, nobody would listen. Right? Okay, here's another one of these crazy prophets who believes in one God is going to tell us what's wrong with us again. Enough is enough. But he starts off telling them things they want to hear. How about all these nations are going to be destroyed? All your potential enemies will be wiped out. But then, hey, you can be wiped out too, because you are not doing things that you believe in too. You claim that you are ethical and you're just not keeping the frumkeit. You're not even keeping the ethical. And I gave you the Nazirim and you made them drink wine. And you commanded the prophets not to prophesy. It says Yirmiyahu does the same thing. Does the same thing. Behold, I will oppress your dwelling places, and like a wagon full of sheaves is oppressed. Just like a wagon full of sheaves of amir, of grain, when it's too heavy, it just falls. This is the way that you will be. You will also collapse. Va'avad manos mikal, and even those who can run quickly will not be able to escape. And the strong will not be able to show their strength. And the mighty man will not be able to deliver themselves. Those who hold the bow will not stand. And the fleet-footed, again, those who can run very quickly will not be delivered. Even those riding on the horse will not be able to deliver themselves. Amitz libo, those strong of heart among the mighty, shall flee naked on that day, which means they won't even be able to prepare themselves. So, an interesting thing, though, it says fleeing. And about Yehuda, it says the palace is burned down. That's really what happened. The northern kingdom was exiled. The southern kingdom was destroyed. And that's eventually what happened, but many years later.
So why is his prophecy different than the other prophecies? You know, if this is going to be to happen 200 years later, then you have Yirmiyahu, you have Yeshaya, you have Yechezkel, you have everybody else doing the same prophecies.
Well,
Over and
first of all,
over
he's
again.
telling the northern kingdom before they're destroyed,
200 years before they're destroyed.
approximately.
So
Takes, yeah.
it's like it doesn't shaykh to them, the people that are listening. So, you know, it's like
It
and
didn't
then
work. He wasn't,
there's so
yeah, he
many
wasn't the only
Nevi'im
one, but
after.
yeah.
And then there's so many more Nevi'im after with the same thing. And the same thing and the same thing.
There's
They
that
still didn't
pulpit
listen.
kicking in again.
But
But it,
There's
yeah. Yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, there he is again on the soapbox.
because people don't take it
Yeah,
seriously.
they all had to do that.
I mean,
but
it's the
you-
same thing in
Not
Israeli
all the same
society.
thing now. Yeah.
Look, in Israeli society, we had all these generals who warned us what was going to happen with the Palestinians.
That's true.
And everybody
Yeah.
wanted to listen to the generals who said, no, it's not true. They're just alarmist. So we didn't listen.
Yeah.
So you have to look to see if the person really understands what they're talking about, not just if they're saying what I want to hear. By the way, there were a lot of yes man prophets in the northern kingdom who said what the kings wanted to hear. Achav had plenty of them. In Mount Carmel, there were 400 of them, prophets of the Baal, who told him whatever he wanted to hear.
Mhm.
Life is easier that way when you hear.
Bilam also. Right.
Yeah. So the point is what's going on. This whole oration was given for the last part, but he wanted to make sure people would listen. Now, all the things that he talks about is going to happen, but eventually, some of it actually already did happen. Like with Aram going to Kir, it's mentioned, I think, in Sefer Malachim. I think I mentioned that before, but and some of it didn't happen. But he's prophesying that these are things going to happen, and this is all to lead up. He's even saying things about Yehuda. In my opinion, this is an indirect way of referring to them too. But then he says, and look, you know what you're really being punished for? Because things that you yourself understand were evil you did. So you have no excuses. That's in the end. I have one other class now, but I just want to say one last thing. Amos, about Yehuda, because I find this a little bit puzzling. According to Sefer Amos, Uzziah was the king of Yehuda during his lifetime. Uzziah was a relatively good king. It says, Asa hayashar b'nei Hashem. He was punished at the end of his life. He got leprosy, sarat. And there's a discussion among Chazal, what exactly happened? Why did he get sarat? It seems that Uzziah wanted to have a position like a Kohen in the Beit HaMikdash, which was not allowed to him. He's from Yehuda, of course. And this was considered a sin. And so this could be also a way to refer to Yehuda, meaning the king of Yehuda, who we had before. Of the transgressions
Isn't that what the Chashmonaim did?
One second.
From the
They
Maccabim?
transgressed it by rejecting the law of God and didn't keep his statutes. In other words, he decided to be a Kohen Gadol, which is against the laws. So it could be that he's actually referring to this, what Uzziah did, according to Chazal, who was so interested in getting involved in the avodah of the Beit HaMikdash that he started doing things which were not allowed. And according to Chazal, that's why he got leprosy at the end of his life. So I'm just saying this is a possible. But as I said before, a more simpler explanation would be, I'm saying things to Yehuda, but listen closely and think, are you also liable for these same things, which I'm not saying. And the only thing he's saying against Israel are the things that you would agree with me about, which are no good. These are the ones I'm telling you. The ones ben Adam lechavero. So, yeah. So that brings us to the end of chapter 2. And the promo for next week is the beginning of chapter 3. I find very interesting. We'll talk about this. The way it's one of the few places in the Tanakh where you can argue But we'll talk about it more. The way he describes the Jewish people is very unusual. First of all, he describes us as a family. It's like one of the only places I think in Tanakh we're called a mishpacha, which I think there's a lot to learn about that concept of what a family means. And this is a promo for next week. And also, not here, but he talks about the chosenness of Israel. But in chapter 9, he seems to equate Israel to other nations too, which is also something which has to be discussed. So
he was like he was a popular and well-loved Navi.
that I couldn't tell you, because look, if Amatzia can openly say to him, go to Judea, they'll be more interested in listening to you there. You know, if he was that popular, I think it would be hard for Amatzia to say that against him. So I don't know how popular he was, but he obviously knew how to talk to the Northern Kingdom. He knew what the introduction had to be to get their attention. But in the end, he said what he had to say, which was probably not a very popular thing. And Yonah was a popular Navi because his first prophecy, according to Chazal, was that the Northern Kingdom would recapture the Gilad, which they were all happy to hear. And it actually happened in his lifetime. So he was like the hero.
Wow.
The second time he gets his nevuah and goes down to the Beis Hamikdash, and he's told about Nineveh, that he doesn't want to tell, because Nineveh was the arch enemy of the Northern Kingdom.
Yeah.
And basically, Yonah figured, if I'm the one who has to tell Nineveh to do tshuva, I don't care if God kills me. Then nobody will be able to tell them until God gets a new prophet. 40 days will go by, and God said he's going to kill Nineveh. Okay, yalla, I'm willing to give my life for that one. Okay, this is Yonah, who was a big nationalist. But Amos, I just don't know. I can say he's a little bit of a nationalist because he's willing not to mention the Agalim in Dan and in Beit El. So he's willing to overlook that to talk to them directly. So,
Thank you, Rafi.
Yeah,
Great
thanks,
class.
Rafi.
Thank you.
Thank
Very
you.
interesting.
Erev Tov.
Bye.
Shavua tov.
Shavua Tov. Bye.
Hi, everybody.
Rafi, we're going to talk about you now. So,
No, he has
'cause
another
I
class.
have
He has a
somebody in a
class.
few
oh,
minutes.
so what do
coming
we
on.
do?
I have
Okay.
somebody
We
who's
gotta
joining me.
say sayonara.
Yeah.
I can give you. We can talk on a WhatsApp if you want.
Okay, he's
Oh,
already
All right.
here.
Bye. Thank you,
Okay.
Rafi.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, shalom, shalom.
Bye.
Okay. Philippe?
Yes, shalom.
Shalom. I would like to just close for a moment because I had a recording of the previous one. I want to close it so the recording starts recording. I mean, starts putting itself into the computer, and then I'll right away open up again its link. Okay?
Right.
So just 1 minute, no more than 1 minute. Thank you.